Our next session, Energizing the Digital Future, Powering Malaysia's Green and Resilient Data Economy, addresses exactly this balance. To share his perspectives, I would like to invite our guest of honor, YB Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad, Member of Parliament for Setiawangsa and former Minister of the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, who has been at the forefront of Malaysia's sustainability and clean energy policies. Please join me in welcoming YB Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad to the stage.
Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera and a very good morning. Datuk Yeo Siew Min, President of MIM, Datuk Ng Tie Chuan, Vice President, Ms. Natalie Rusman, Director of CAS, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank MIM and the organizers for inviting me to this event. And also with regards to the launch of the glossary just now, my only complaint is that it's a bit too late, because when I first became minister, I was also lost with all the abbreviations and the short forms and the terms that I actually told the press that it felt like I was in university for the first month of being minister, right? Because I think that something like sustainability is something that is too important for it to be lost in these technical terms. And while it may be useful to have these terms, whether with regards to climate diplomacy or with regards to the science and everything, we also need to be able to reach out to the public with regards to on how we communicate, on how we tell our story on sustainability. Because if we don't, then the public will not see the importance, or worse, will think that ESG is actually making life more difficult. It's making things more expensive, and you will have a backlash against ESG policies. So I would like to thank the UN Global Compact for being able to come up with this glossary. I mean, it was just skimmed through it, and it seemed very accessible and very useful for everyone to be able to have this stuff. So, as mentioned, we are talking about the two aspects, the energy transition and also digital growth. It can be positive if harnessed properly. It can be a challenge if not. As we all know, for example, the demand for data centers, for example, is driving the demand for energy, driving the demand for resources in our country. At the same time, we also know that in order for us to be able to deal with the climate emergency, what is no longer called, climate change actually does not properly translate the crisis that we are in. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has actually called it global heating or global boiling, right? So, in order to do that, we need the data. We need to be able to harness the power that we have, the data analytics, the technology, for us to be able to face this crisis. So, ladies and gentlemen, in order to do so, we have to be able to truly master energy transition and the digital resources as best as we can. When people question Malaysia's decision to embrace data center investments in the country, my answer has always been that we have to take a pragmatic and practical approach. We should not just welcome every and any data center, but we must be able, again, the need for data, the need for technology, we should open up to it, and we can also allow, because they are premium consumers and they have their own net zero targets, we should allow the data centers to drive the tariffs and the policies that we have, in order so that we can create a tariff that is more suited to customers that need high energy and high water consumption. I went to a data center in Johor, but they told me, but we are not cash cows. Please don't squeeze us too much. I understand that, right? But I do think that balance has to be found, and I think data centers also recognize that because of the impact that they have on resources, that they are willing to pay a bit more than other consumers. And I think what the government has done is that shift from blanket to targeted subsidies is actually very, very crucial. Because previously, in actuality, if you are consuming more energy and more water, you are getting more subsidies from the government. And I think that is something that is problematic. But today, we have started the shift where if you are high consumers of energy, for example, then you have to pay a market rate. And that's only fair, right? Obviously, if you're an SME, if you're a household with, if you're P40, M40, then you should be able to enjoy subsidies. So, and that is also important, because if we do not have that just transition, and it goes back to telling the story right, you will drive away the public opinion to support sustainability. And that is what will break our journey towards net zero. So, Malaysia has ambitious goals. We are a small country, relatively. We contribute about 0.7% of global emissions. In absolute number, very low. In per capita rates, not so great. We are actually quite high. But at the end of the day, Malaysia wants to show that we are just as ambitious, and we want to play our part. Climate change is real, it's impacting our country. Some developed countries may not be so interested in climate change in this day and age, but Malaysia, we will work with countries in the world who recognize this crisis. And I think that most countries today do recognize. And for the younger generation, I can say what we did in government, I think one of the most important things, all the climate change policy, inshallah, we will see it in Parliament in October. We will have, we passed the Energy Efficiency Conservation Act, and we have all these policies. But one of the most important things is to include both private sector and the civil society through our consultative and advisory panel for climate change. And we now have a youth cluster. And if you say that we need to create awareness for the young, I don't think that's true, because they are much more aware than us, the older generation. But we need to embrace this energy that they have, the younger generation, so that we can drive more ambitious policies. And today, Malaysia has this target of net zero by 2050. But most importantly, next year we are also going to come up with our national adaptation policy, because we know that climate change is already happening in front of our eyes. So what we have today, the topic that's being discussed, is very much relevant, and I do hope that as the private sector, the civil society, you can continue to be a partner to government for us to drive this transition to a resilient and green future for Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you, YB Nik Nazmi, for those inspiring words. Kindly take your seat on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite Mr. Idzaid Idros, Program Manager at CAS Malaysia, to accompany YB Nik Nazmi on stage for a fireside chat. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for this session, Mr. Idzaid Idros. With a background in engineering and passion for public policy, Idzaid brings a unique blend of analytical thinking and strategic insight to his work. At CAS Malaysia, he leads impactful initiatives at the intersection of governance, technology, and leadership, helping to shape conversation on AI, sustainability, and democratic participation across Malaysia and the region. Known for his engaging moderation style and ability to connect diverse ideas and people, Idzaid is committed to building inclusive platforms for dialogue and action. Over onto you, Idz.
Thank you so much, Rishi. First of all, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to everybody here, especially to YB Nik Nazmi. Thank you so much for joining us today. So as Rishi was saying, I am from the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. My background is actually in engineering, environmental engineering. So it's going to be an interesting fireside chat we'll have this morning. YB Nik Nazmi just asked me what happened to my hand. And you see, this is what happens when you don't listen to your wife. So if your wife tells you there are two fighting cats, do not separate the cats. What do? You separate the cats. And then this is what happens. So that's to answer your question, YB. Now, our fireside chat. So when I was studying back in Germany, fireside, normally you would have some grilling as well. So before we start the grilling, and before we get to those important questions, I just wanted to ask you, it's been a topsy-turvy year for you. Human to human, because our last conference was about AI, and the key takeaway from AI was that we should try to become more human. So YB, how are you doing? How are you doing right now? It's been a crazy year for you.
Thank you. Alhamdulillah, I think I'm enjoying the respite because I think I enjoyed my time as at the ministry. I learned a lot of things, met a lot of good people. You know, I've been to amazing places on the ground. And I think the takeaway is that, as I said, it was a big transition for me when I became a minister for the environment. But I can say that, you know, I've fallen in love with it. I just got back from doing a documentary in Belum on tiger conservation. I'm going to the discussion on the global ethical stocktake by the COP30 presidency, Brazil, which will be done in New Delhi next week. So yeah, I'm still a minister with less protocol, I guess.
Okay, I think it's a testament to your time in the ministry, to your time as a minister. I think it's a testament to what you've done to this country, for this country, because everybody, whenever we think of ESG, whenever we think of renewable energies by the government, immediately we think of you. So first of all, everybody, a round of applause for YB. I think he's done a stellar job. And now we come to the questions. Okay. So Malaysia's booming digital economy, that's today's topic. Particularly with the rapid growth of data centers and cloud services, is extremely energy intensive. How do you see renewable power meeting this demand without undermining our climate commitments?
Thank you. As I mentioned just now, I think if you take an approach, an extreme approach of saying, oh, we do not want to welcome any investments on data centers in the country, I think we are also being hypocritical. Because at the end of the day, we are all using data. And it is coming from somewhere, right? So you're not, you can't just wish it away unless you do not use technology. So, but what is the challenge? The challenge is that we should be more selective. If it has more AI and all that, that's one. But we should also create a framework where if they are demanding, they are more energy and water intensive, then we should be able to charge them a bit more. We can allow, one of the things now that we've started, that this government has started is third-party access, where you can get direct supply of renewable energy from the producers just by using the grid to for example, the data centers. So it can drive policy change that was not there before. So I think that's where we must get it right. We should not have a blanket no data center policy, but we must be more selective and we must create resources. We must create the framework to allow them to operate in a sustainable manner. Another thing, last one, is also on water. Before this, the best, the simplest thing for any industry in Malaysia is just to use treated water. It's cheap in Malaysia, right? Pahang, for example, did not increase their water tariffs for 40 years. So you can imagine the price of nasi lemak in 1980 and the price of nasi lemak today. However, one is that we've started to increase the water tariffs, but because of their ESG commitments, data centers are also trying to harness reclaim water, recycle water, and so on and so forth, right? Because they have that target. So I think that's where we should harness that demand, but we must ensure that it's done responsibly, and we are selective in which data centers we take in.
Okay, that's a very comprehensive answer. I think especially with data centers, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be highly energy intensive. It's going to also take in a lot of water. Now, data centers in ASEAN is a booming market. How can Malaysia differentiate itself from the other countries in the region, let's say Singapore, Vietnam? How can we attract more investors into the country? And how can we better counteract these environmental impacts compared to everyone else?
Well, I think the benefit, and we've seen that's why the data centers grew remarkably in Malaysia over the last few years, particularly in Johor. Singapore has a few constraints: cost, space, right? And three is also the fact that they do not have enough renewable energy. They need to import renewable energy, right? The fact that they're talking about importing from Australia, from Vietnam, and all that, it shows volumes on the challenges that they face. So it makes sense for Malaysia to tap into that. What Malaysia has, one is our location, right? Just like Singapore, we are at the center of ASEAN. Two is that we have the talent. I was meeting some British investor just now, where for them they are amazed at the talent in IT that we have in Malaysia, in data that we have in Malaysia. Cost, we also have space, right? But again, as you rightly said, how do we harness it as best as we can? And I think we should make it hand in hand by building these data centers, also by making this as one of the catalysts to actually realize this whole idea of interconnecting ASEAN in terms of power supply. Malaysia, for example, we are great for solar, but we have lousy wind, right? We can't generate electricity with the wind that we have today. But Vietnam has that. So we should use this demand. For example, we have the Bakun Dam. The idea, this was 80s, 90s, was to supply Peninsula, but the cost did not make sense. But today, because of energy prices being higher, and two, because of sustainability objectives, it makes sense, right? Singapore is also interested in that. So all this should be harnessed so that we can also position Malaysia as the catalyst and the center of renewable energy through the ASEAN power grid.
Okay, thank you very much for answering that question. It's interesting you brought up Singapore just now. So one of the things which I've talked to many of my colleagues and a number of my friends is that whenever we talk about Singapore and Malaysia and other countries here in ASEAN, we always bring up brain drain. So brain drain is something which I think everybody can agree. We've been talking about brain drain for the past maybe 40, 50 years. Even back when I was in high school, everybody was saying, oh, brain drain, everybody's leaving to the UK. So now when it comes to ESG, when it comes to these data centers, how can we ensure that people will actually stay here? Our bright minds will stay in this country and not go somewhere else?
Well, I think we have to harness our strong points. For example, we tend to forget Malaysia is one of the 17 most mega diverse countries in terms of biodiversity in the world. And what is remarkable is that the other countries, among others, are Brazil, the US, China, Russia, Australia. Those are massive countries. South Africa, right? Malaysia is a small country, and yet one study has shown that, I'm a lawyer, I'm not an engineer, right? A study has shown that 1/5, 20% of all known species in the world exist in Malaysia. I think that's remarkable. And we have scholars and academicians and researchers from Europe, from the US and all that. They want to come to Malaysia to study nature, right? Because what's left of nature in the UK, right? So I think we should harness that. And I mean, literally, the grass is always greener on the other side, but there are a lot of things that we can realize. One of the things that the government has been trying to do, and one of the things that I have not succeeded, obviously, during my short tenure, is that we do not have a natural history museum. A lot of the collection that, if you know Wallace, when he came in the 1800s, most of it is in the UK. So that's something that we should showcase. Singapore has a natural history museum, and what natural history is there in Singapore, I'm sorry to say. So Malaysia, we should really make this as our selling point, because that is a competitive advantage that we have not used enough. And by doing that, we can combat all this misconception about palm oil, about supposedly all the wrongs that we're doing, by showcasing what we've done right. So I think that is something that we can do. And again, our geographical position, being at the center of Southeast Asia, is something that we have not leveraged enough. And I think that is something we should really, really focus on.
Okay, so the answer about the Natural History Museum, that's not something I expected. But it's true. When's the last time any one of you went off to Museum Negara? Okay, we have one person back there. It's true. If you look at our museums, if you compare them to museums overseas, it's completely different. I think what we're lacking is that, honestly speaking, is that we've always thought that Europe or the UK, we've always thought that those were the leaders. We always looked up to them, whereas we forgot to look within ourselves and within our country to see how beautiful this country actually is. So whenever Germans come to Malaysia, they don't go and spend time in the city. No, they go off to Taman Negara. They go off to all of these beautiful natural resources which we have. So those are things that we cannot forget. And I hope that whoever's watching online today, we promote this. We promote Malaysia as a green destination hub. Now, usually we be taking questions on Slido. Unfortunately, there are technical difficulties, but life goes on. So for that one, I'm going to open the floor now for questions. For today, though, I think we'll try to keep things on the topic. So it's about ESG and data centers. Please leave the politics outside, if we can. And the floor is open now for any questions. Please just go up to the mics. We'll take about 2 or 3 questions for YB.
Assalamualaikum. YB, I'm Sharifah Nur Kamsia binti Datuk Syed Ahmad Idzaid. Thank you for sharing with us your insights. I would like to inquire, as the government had announced that Cabinet is accepting nuclear power and it will be ready after 2030, what is your view of the need to incorporate nuclear into the National Energy Transition Plan? Thank you.
So we'll gather a few questions, so about 2 or 3.
Hi YB, I'm Zayana from ISIS Malaysia. I currently work on data center and its impacts on climate change. So one of the things that increased the boom of data centers in Malaysia is because of the moratorium in Singapore. So a lot of the Singaporean companies are now, Malaysia hosts these data centers and we service the Singapore needs as well, which means that the emissions are then accounted to us. So eventually it will also increase our reporting to the international organizations, UN. So how do you think we can mitigate this and ensure that we focus on our AI ambitions first rather than focusing on services other countries? Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question. If not, then we'll answer those 2 first. So YB, I think the first question was about the nuclear power in the country.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, every time I see Dr. Sharifah, I know her question. It will not run away from nuclear. So when the first year I was in charge, Minister of NRECC, Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, Energy and Water and Flood Mitigation was under my purview. So I oversaw the Power Development Plan. So this is a 20-year plan that the government will, they will do it every year to look at, the approvals for new power plants, which source of energy, whether it's gas, coal, solar, so on and so forth. It's a 20-year runaway. So I asked them, so that was 2023, so we had a plan until 2042. But I said, I just want to know, we are talking about net zero about 2050 for Malaysia. Can you just plan out for me, just so that I can understand what is our game plan to achieve net zero by 2050? So this is, it's an academic exercise, it's not binding and anything, but they did then put a small thing, a bar in the chart, so you have gas. By then, I think by 2040, we will have no more coal by then in our energy generation, so on and so forth, until that small bar. And I said, they say others. I said, what is this other? And I said, it's nuclear. So we know nuclear is controversial. Malaysia was very close to developing our nuclear plant until 2018, when the government at that time decided to not pursue it with Fukushima and everything. But if you, I have an engineer next to me, and you studied in Germany, right? And nuclear is never easy. Even in the West and all that, Germany, there was a lot of controversy. Japan, obviously, after Fukushima. But seriously, even some green politicians who were adamantly against nuclear in the past, when you look at the climate crisis today, the proven technology that we have, zero emissions, is nuclear. Right? But there are other issues, safety, security, health, and all that we have to manage. And I'm not belittling that. So even then, when people ask me, I did say that we haven't decided, but we have to look at the nuclear option seriously and study it, right? And the government has continued that policy. Datuk Sri Fadilah, who took over the energy portfolio, has also said the same thing. And now, we have actually gone on the next level. So I think we need to be open to it. We know that there are serious concerns, and we have to address and engage that. We cannot just sweep it under the carpet. But for those who are against it, I think we just have to look at the facts. Solar is great, but it is intermittent. We only get 4 hours peak solar in Malaysia, unless you are in the north of the peninsula or in Sabah. Wind, unfortunately, under current technology, you can't generate in Malaysia. We have biomass and all that, but it's very disconnected. Nuclear must be considered. So I think that is something that the government is looking at. And if you're talking about net zero by 2050 with the climate crisis, it is an important consideration for us to look into. On the second question, on data centers and why are we taking it for Singapore, right? Like all the emissions it registers in Malaysia is actually for stuff that's being demanded, data that is being demanded in Singapore, for example. Again, as I said, similarly, previously, the previous government did not allow export of renewable energy to Singapore. The argument is that Malaysia does not have enough, why should we export? But, come on, Malaysians, we are good at this. We know Singaporeans want to pay more, right? That is trade, and that's the reality of trade. So we should benefit from that. So obviously, I'm not saying selling everything, we can have quotas and everything, but we should benefit. Again, if Singapore wants to pay for a cable to Australia, Johor is 1 kilometer away or less. Why aren't we benefiting from that? Right? They're talking about Vietnam, they're talking about Sarawak. And yes, Sarawak is Malaysia, but what about Peninsula? Johor again is so near, right? So I think that is on energy. So similarly on data, I don't see the problem provided, because everything, a lot of industry, a lot of manufacturing which is consumed in Singapore is being done in Malaysia. Because Singapore is heavily urbanized and then there's cost issues, lack of space. A lot of it is being done in Malaysia, but we should do it in such a way that we no longer sell it on the cheap to Singapore. Charge a premium, make money from that, and use that to bring up our energy sector, bring up our data sector. But obviously, it can't be a free-for-all. There has to be regulations, there has to be controls. We have to monitor it closely. so that we do not lose out. Right? We have our net zero goals. We want to meet it. So we have to manage it as best as we can. I mean, what advantage do we have over Singapore? We have huge carbon sinks. 53% of our surface is either forest or tree cover, right? So those are benefits that we have and we should leverage on in our trade with any country, including Singapore.
Okay, thank you very much, YB. Now, coming back to the thing about selling energy to Singapore. Singapore is more keen on buying from Sarawak. What is the reason behind that? Is Peninsula just not producing enough energy? Or is it a price issue? Oh, so what is the logic behind that?
Well, the questions are getting harder. Well, I think one reason is that, as we know, energy, or electricity regulation, federal only controls, it used to control Peninsula and Sabah, but we've devolved that to Sabah last year. So Sabah and Sarawak control their own electricity policy. So when the previous government did not allow the export of green energy to Singapore, it did not apply to Sarawak. But it's not an easy project because it's massive, right? This project has been talked about for decades. I mean, to supply to Peninsula, and it has to cross Indonesian waters. And Indonesia also wants to supply green energy to Singapore, and they also have the benefit of distance. I mean, not as close as Johor, but they are not that far relative to Sarawak. So those are the challenges that Sarawak is facing. But I think now that there is some progress, Sarawak, federal government and Singapore, they are working together. I think TNB and Petronas is involved. But simply because of the policy of not allowing from the Peninsula level. But now we've started. Actually, hydroelectricity from Laos is already being consumed in Singapore via Thailand and Peninsula. And then they want to buy from Vietnam. And then, the plan is to connect Vietnam, because we actually have a maritime border with Vietnam. We do not have to cross a third country. So Vietnam to Kelantan, into our grid, all the way to Singapore. And we also can benefit from that renewable energy resource. So that is actually starting now. But it takes time for it to be realized.
Thank you so much for the honest answer. Yes. Okay, we'll take one or two more questions from the floor. And then I think, so the lady over there in the white top.
Hello, my name is Alia. So I want to ask to YB Nik Nazmi, what kind of incentive or framework can the government provide to ensure that these young people can be hired or trained in the green-related fields in Malaysia for the next 10 years? Thank you.
Okay, and one more question. Anybody else? If not, then we'll concentrate on that question over there.
Thank you. It's easier to give honest answers when you're no longer the minister. Yeah. Okay, what do you call that? Incentives for young people. I think one of the things is, the sustainability sector is growing very fast. But the question is, what are the standards? Is it real or is it greenwashing? And these are real questions that people are asking from the private sector, from the consumers, right? When they see something, it's supposedly green. Is it really green? So I think one of the best things that the government can do is to actually have proper definitions, regulations. We've started relatively okay. I know Bursa, Bank Negara, Securities Commission, they've started some frameworks and all that. But I think, maybe there has to be slightly more. There has to be a certification process so that people know that it is truly credible, right? When someone claims that it's a green product, then it's truly green, right? So if you have that, that will create a proper field for sustainability practitioners for young people to be trained in that sector. There is now, but it's not properly regulated yet, right? So if we can do that, that will be a massive sector for young people to be involved in. And I think that's what the government can do. Maybe businesses, they obviously you have to do it in a way that is not too onerous on businesses. Sometimes when government do things, they look at from a government and in a silo perspective, without understanding the challenges that businesses, SMEs are facing. So there has to be a proper communication with regards to this. But I think for businesses as well, if it provides certainty, clarity of purpose, they also want to be part of it. I give you an example, slightly off topic, is like plastics. When I talk to the manufacturers of goods, whether it's pharmaceuticals, consumer goods, food products, they are very pro-plastic, a global plastic treaty. Because they say now that different countries have different patchwork of policies, which means that it's very onerous for them to comply. But if you have one set standard globally, obviously the plastic sector is not too happy about it, but if you have one set of practical standard, not too ambitious, but with some progress on reducing single-use plastics and all that, I think businesses welcome that. So similarly for this, some form of regulation would be great, right? And similarly, just a short one on our green sector, on our ecotourism and all that. That's a massive thing. As you rightly said, when I was in Belum, 90% of the people are Mat Saleh, right? They love our jungles. So that's a massive thing. And you can create value to our forests that people do not see now. And when you create value, then there's a value in conserving them. So I think that is something that we can really engage our young people. They may not be great in engineering or what, but they can be good guides. They can tell the story. Then that's wonderful. And it can create another big opportunity for them to be involved in. And then they, again, see the value that being green is not only good for the spirit, but it's also good for the pocket.
Okay. We're actually running out of time right now, but YB, you were talking about single-use plastics. And this is something that we can actually learn from Germany. So, of course, I work for a German organization, so can I promote sikit again? All right. So for the German, what they do in Germany is, let's say you have a Coke bottle or you have a water bottle, a plastic one. They actually charge 25 cents per plastic bottle. And when you go back to the supermarket, you can dump that plastic bottle into a machine, and then you get 25 cents back. So it's a way of incentivizing people to actually recycle, so that way you can actually get that money back. And when you're a student in Germany, if you compile all of those plastic bottles, eventually you get something like 10 euros, and 10 euros can take you a very long way as a student. We are actually going to wrap up the session right now. I think, I think for myself though, I have one final question for you, YB. If you could give one message to Malaysia's business leaders, policymakers, and citizens about energizing the digital future, what would it be? What is the one action Malaysia must take now to truly seize this opportunity?
So you do save the hardest question for last. I think my message would be to have government must always be very clear with their policies. I think for governments, and I totally understand. I mean, I've been in politics for all my working life. We are always scared of upsetting stakeholders, upsetting businesses, upsetting the public. So you are scared of making difficult decisions, right? But I think more important than that, whether it's the businesses, whether it's the public, they want to see clarity. So you may have a slightly unpopular decision, right? And again, it's you don't really know the true thing because sometimes the noisiest are not really representative. There's a silent majority out there, right? But if you're really clear, you know your purpose, whether it's plastics, whether it's climate change, whether it's preservation nature, hold on to it, be firm with it, communicate it clearly, have a practical roadmap, not tomorrow I want to make plastics disappear from the country, which is not practical, but you have clear roadmaps, clear targets, hold on firm to that. Then I think, people will understand that, right? But if you think that again, there's that famous quote, a politician thinks about the next election, but a statesman thinks about the next generation. So you have to think like a statesman, but it is a difficult thing to do. It is a difficult thing to do because people are scared about losing their jobs, right? So, but that's my challenge, and I think truly, and I speak to businesses, actually they do say they may have some issues with one or two policies, but they say if you're clear, you're firm, do not U-turn, do not zigzag with your policies, they are actually fine with it over the long run. That's what they want most, more than what is deemed as easy policies for them.
Clarity. Thank you so much, YB. I think this fireside chat, ladies and gentlemen, once again, please clap your hands, put your hands together for YB, Nik Nazmi. I think the answers you gave today were very honest, and I think I appreciate that very much. And I think even last time when you were the minister, I think you were also very honest, and the milestones that you met and that you set for this country, I think those will echo through generations. So thank you for being a statesman.
Thank you, YB Nik Nazmi, Mr. Idzaid, for that meaningful session. Please remain on stage. I would now like to invite Yang Berbahagia Datuk Yosumin, President of MIM, accompanied by Mr. Kabinesh Eliatambi, CEO of MIM, to the stage for the plaque presentation to YB Nik Nazmi.